The honourable member for Thornhill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to split my time with the honourable member from Regina Capel. And I'll start by saying that the threats by U.S. President-elect Donald Trump come as a serious threat to Canada and to our prosperity. It's exactly why we're here tonight. But while this announcement is somewhat unprecedented and obviously worrying, it's not for a moment unexpected. See, Donald Trump didn't appear out of nowhere. He was effectively running for president for 4 years, most of that time as a frontrunner. He made tariffs and trade restrictions a central part of his platform, a central part of his campaign as a whole. The president literally said that tariffs are the greatest thing ever invented. Those were his words. But last night's announcement revealed that the Prime Minister doesn't have a plan. He certainly doesn't have a Canada First plan for our economy or for our security. But let's look at how the government worked against Canada. They continued with their radical economic vandalism and their job-killing agenda. He continued to hike a carbon tax, raising capital gains taxes, adding piles of red tape on top of an already struggling business sector. He pushed forward with an agenda that doubled home prices. He doubled the national debt. Crime has doubled in this country. Our GDP per capita is smaller now than when the Prime Minister took office. In fact, it dropped more than any other G7 country since COVID. We have the most indebted households, the worst housing inflation, and food prices have risen 37% faster here than in the U.S., while record numbers of Canadians now visit food banks. That is their record. The Canadian economy now stands at record weakness, and we're already at a disadvantage. Businesses were already thinking about leaving, and now it's going to get even worse. It's hard to see how anybody might think that we are starting from a negotiating position of strength. And speaking of negotiations, has anybody on that side of the House, anybody in the Prime Minister's office or anybody anywhere else thought to continue the relationships from the President's team since 2020? Has anybody thought to build relationships with members of the U.S. House, of the U.S. Senate, anybody of importance in Washington? We know that they say it, but it's quite clear that saying it doesn't make it reality. And could anybody read the writing on the wall to see what was coming? I think we know the answers to all of those questions, although they certainly act like that's not the case. And it's clearer than ever that the Prime Minister has no plan. That's what we are demanding. He had no plan to anticipate the re-election of Donald Trump. He sat around for weeks until these tariffs were announced. And his big idea is a call tomorrow. A bunch of politicians sitting around a table, photo op. We need a Canada First plan. That's what the Leader of the Opposition reiterated. We needed that yesterday on the economy, on security, on the border, on so much else. But for good measure, let's start with the economy. The Prime Minister has to now cancel the plan to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. It was a bad idea then. It is certainly a bad idea now that is going to tax everyone. So we're going to axe the tax on everyone, on everything, forever. And that's going to ensure our prosperity, at least a stronger negotiating position with the U.S. These tax rises cost more for everything, including food, gas, energy, and combined with those tariffs from Donald Trump, or the threat of those tariffs, it will put our economy 6 feet under. Additionally, the Prime Minister must revoke his plan to place the energy cap on natural resources and industries, which would see our country produce 35% less. Natural resources are our biggest job creator, our biggest export. They want what we have. And Donald Trump says he wants to cut energy prices in half, and they can do that by importing clean Canadian energy. And finally, he must cancel all of the tax increases on work, on investment, and making things here in Canada. They were a bad idea then. They are certainly a bad idea now. And his capital gains increases are going to drive businesses south. They're going to take thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars with them to the U.S. These common-sense economic policies of axing the tax, scrapping the cap, not only save Canadian jobs, they will also help us in a negotiating position compared to the U.S. or with the United States. And they will help reverse the economic vandalism that we have seen after 9 years of this Prime Minister, of this Liberal NDP government, and the carnage that they have caused in the Canadian economy. And it goes way past the economy. On immigration, the Prime Minister had already admitted that he had broke a generational consensus on the immigration, on the system. And every Canadian will tell you that too now. 4.9 million temporary visas and permits have been issued, and they are to expire in December of 2025. But the immigration minister practically revealed yesterday that there is no plan to ensure that those who overstay their welcome actually go home. This government let in 2 ISIS terrorists, a father and a son duo, plotting an attack about 10 minutes from the riding that I represent. Another one arrested near Montreal, an attack on the Jewish community in New York. He utterly failed to properly screen the people coming in here, and we need a Canada-first approach to protect our security and our sovereignty and control those who are living and those who are leaving our country. We need to protect Canadians to keep our own country safe. On top of that, a Canada First plan would put a stop to the out-of-control illegal drugs in this country. 47,000 Canadians have died due to drug overdoses, a number higher, get this, higher than Canada lost in the Second World War. That number is staggering. There is a 200% increase in overdose deaths after just 9 years of this Prime Minister, and it's thanks to his radical legalization of drugs and his policies that put continued addiction over that of hope and recovery. We've talked about it in this House so many times, and it's time for the Prime Minister to finally act on it. Today, the police chief in the City of London, in Ontario, confirmed that what we've been saying for years, that hard drugs of the Liberal NDP unsafe supply programs are being diverted into our streets. Last year, the force seized 30,000 hydromorphine pills, most of them being sourced directly from these programs. They're flooding into our streets, and they're also flooding across the border into the U.S. We know that. All you have to do is look outside. We must put a stop to our brothers and our sisters, our sons and daughters, our aunts and uncles falling victim to the poisonous plan that this Prime Minister and this Liberal NDP government are pushing. We must end the vast black market, transnational trade of dangerous drugs that this Prime Minister has created. The Prime Minister can do that today by immediately announcing that he will end his failed, radical, unsafe supply experiment to bring our loved ones home drug-free with detox and treatment, wraparound services, and stop funding the drug smugglers and the transnational trade. Everyone sees that the Prime Minister couldn't negotiate. Everyone sees that the Prime Minister can't keep his promises, and everyone sees that the Prime Minister has lost control, not only of his own caucus, of his own party, but of the entire country. He's opened the door. The President has opened the door to not implementing these tariffs, as long as we implement the ideas that we spoke about tonight. Then he implies the tariffs will not be levied. And from there, we find a silver lining. It's because we can fix these issues. The Prime Minister can do that. He can stand up and tell Canadians. He can show up in this debate and tell Canadians to axe the tax, to finally lay out a plan to make sure that those who overstay their welcome with their permits live up to their agreements and actually leave this country. He can tell Canadians he's going to immediately end his unsafe consumption-free drug bonanza. He can do all of those things. The only thing missing in all of this is a Prime Minister and his leadership. He has been here for 9 years. He's had 3 presidents, and he's failed. And if you read Robert Lighthouser's book, which I'm sure many of my colleagues will quote tonight, you will know that the Prime Minister's first approach with Donald Trump failed, and we can't afford a second one. He can continue to stick his head in the sand and pretend like nothing's wrong, and he can continue pushing jobs and money out of this country. The Prime Minister has a choice to make tonight. We as Canadians only hope that he makes the right choice, to put Canada first. I know he won't do that, and that's why this country desperately needs an election.
Questions and comments. Question commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, you know, in the last 9 years, we have seen many trade agreements signed off on. In fact, no government in the history of Canada has signed off on as many trade agreements with other countries than this government. We've even had a trade agreement sign off with President Trump previously. And during the negotiations of that particular agreement, when it really came down and started to get difficult, you had the leader of the Conservative Party today say, capitulate. Just sign it. Get an agreement, as he was panicking, Mr. Speaker. And at the time, we said, no, we are going to continue to get the best deal for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. And we continued the negotiations. Why should the Canadians have any confidence in the leader of the Conservative Party that the moment he started to panic, he was prepared to capitulate and give whatever it took to the United States? Why should they have any trust or confidence in that leader?
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, I think the member opposite has just a revisionist version of history. It was actually them that capitulated. In fact, you know why Canadians would have confidence in Conservatives? Because 80 days after the Prime Minister Harper was elected, he got a deal on softwood lumber. Do you know how much money is still sitting in Washington from illegally collected tariffs? $9 billion. That's the Prime Minister's record. We still have Buy America. And if you read the book of the chief negotiator, and that member was not at the table, and thank goodness for Canada that he wasn't, but if you read the book of the chief negotiator, he will tell you everything that had happened and why Canada got a bad deal, and it won't happen again under the next Prime Minister of Canada, the Member of Parliament from Carleton.
Question commentaire. Questions and comments. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for La Salle et Verdun. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened to the speech by the member for Thornhill attentively. I would like to know, in her opinion, because throughout her speech and that of her leader, there was quite a ferocious criticism made of the Liberal government, a justified one. I would like to know, how would the Conservative government do better in trade negotiations with the U.S.?
He very well could have listened to the speech. We are going to have a Canada First approach that not only puts Canadians first and fixes everything that the Prime Minister has broken over the last 9 years. The drugs flowing over the borders, the punishing taxes on Canadians, on Canadian workers, on Canadian investment, the fact that our military is desperately underfunded when they have asked for a 2% commitment. That's what a Conservative government will do different. Perhaps the member opposite hasn't been listening for the last number of months, but we have laid out a plan for the next Conservative majority government in this country, and Canadians cannot wait.
Then comments. The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been clear from Donald Trump's intervention on this in terms of the tariff that it was drugs and crime coming from the Canadian border. Now, the member from Carleton was part of the Harper administration and sat at the cabinet table, and even when I asked him earlier this evening, still has no regrets of cutting 1,100 members loose that were doing intelligence office work, and that it's actually frontline and going to work with the United States law enforcement agencies. There were also sniffer dog teams that were cut under the Harper administration with the member from Carleton at the cabinet table. And there was also frontline workers. This is not my opinion. This is the opinion of the workers from there who have done that. So my question, quite frankly, is why was axing the officers a good plan by the Conservative Party? And what are they willing to do now to make those numbers up? Because they recently voted against the CBSA stocking up back on officers again.
Member for Thornhill.
Member is right that we voted against stocking up the CBSA with more bureaucracy. There was actually more frontline officers under the Harper government than that member has told this House. So if he wants to traffic in falsehoods and misinformation, that's his prerogative, but it has no place here. It probably has a place with his friends in the Liberal Party.